Welcome back to the space where research on Black women meets the real world, the Psychology of Black Womanhood podcast. I'm Dr. Dion Stevens, a co-author of the Psychology of Black Woman book, which this podcast accompanies. Abortion is a complex, multifaceted issue that touches on health, autonomy, and justice. But for Black women, the conversation is even more nuanced, shaped by the intersections of race, history, and systemic inequality. Research has noted that Black women navigating the decision to seek an abortion requires unique mental and emotional support to address culturally specific barriers, whether that's access to care, stigma, or a lack of culturally competent providers. The ways in which therapy and counseling services can provide crucial support in this process has also been found to be critical for ensuring Black women have the space to heal, process, and make empowered decisions. In this episode, I'm speaking with researcher and therapist, Dr. Marckdaline Johnson. Her research on Black women's experiences with pregnancy termination and the accompanying therapeutic process is discussed in her research project titled An Exploration of the Lived Experiences of Women Who Had Abortions and the Effects of Abortion on Their Relationships. Dr. Johnson is the clinical director at the Silent Mark Empowerment Center. With nearly 2 decades of mental health experience, she helps men and women find strength and empowerment as they navigate the pain of abortion, miscarriage, loss of self, and relationship or marital conflicts. Dr. Johnson is dedicated to guiding individuals towards healing and reclaiming their innate power. I think it would be useful if you could start off by sharing your journey with us. You do this work around grief, loss, and maternal health, including miscarriage, abortion. And as a therapist, that can't be easy. How did you get into this area of work?
Well, Dion, thank you so much for having me here. It's not often that I get the opportunity to really share my story as it relates to my work as a therapist and the clients that I get an opportunity to serve. So I'm glad that I have this opportunity to meet with you. My journey actually as a therapist started, well, before I go into me as a therapist, my journey in this arena of life started with my own experience with an abortion. I grew up in a 2-parent household. I had my mother actively in my life, my father actively in my life. I was actively in church, and I went off to college. And given the opportunities we have in college, I was raised in a very strict household. And I'm not blaming that per se, but I was raised in a strict household where there were certain conversations we didn't get to have, right? And being in college, you get to explore, you get to see things you didn't have an opportunity to see, you get to hear conversations you never had an opportunity to have. And so for me, I fell into this situation where there was a gentleman I was involved with. We can call it a relationship because that is what it was. Initially, it was exclusive. And as time went on, I found that I started gaining some insecurities within the relationship, but I stayed in the relationship. And so as time went on, my body started feeling different. And at this time, I believe I was 19, on the verge of 20. My body started feeling different, things I had never experienced before. Even with the monthly cycle, I had no cramps, no nothing. So this thing was very new to me. Went to a doctor's appointment, found out that I was pregnant, and I don't know that my mind could even conceive the news I received. Absolutely. And so I had a conversation with him, tried to figure out what was going to be the best course of option. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't the person I wanted to be with, or I didn't see him being in my life long term. Up until that moment, I never even considered that. Right. And so in that moment, I let him know we have to make a decision. Never thought abortion would even be a conversation. I never even fathomed the idea of talking about abortion. And in that moment, it felt like the necessary thing. Couldn't even face the idea of my parents finding out. Couldn't face the idea of them possibly emotionally cutting me off. And so to me, that was the best course of option. And fast forward, I kept it secret for over a decade. And when I say kept it secret, no one knew except for the gentleman I was involved with. Right. And I found myself in the doctorate program, marriage and family therapy program in Fort Lauderdale. And during that time, I really started finding it difficult to hide the reality of my experience. I would get triggered by different things. And so throughout the process of my doctorate program, I found that the more I learned about Bowen family systems and generational patterns and how anxiety gets trapped into systems that we're a part of, I realized I needed to face it. And with that, and with the help of my committee members, they were able to help guide me through my own journey, which allowed me to then become an advocate for women who have had abortions and kept their abortion secret, because not in my own self as an individual, but as a clinician, I saw that even as a professional, we struggle to talk about the things we've gone through. Mm-hmm. So that's really much of what brought me here. And now that I'm here, I am so thankful.
Right. I think that's important to think about, that something that might have seemed so horrible at one time might be actually what we need to move forward and to make a difference. You actually, in your work, talk about reproductive trauma. Can you explain what that is?
Absolutely. So reproductive trauma has to do with just the word itself, trauma and reproductive or reproduction. It's when a person, not limited to women, but it's when a man and a woman have experienced a life loss as it relates to reproduction, right? So for some people, as weird as it sounds, we don't realize we have been envisioning family since childhood. Girls, we're playing with baby dolls, we're feeding, the man is working, or the boy is driving the truck, he's doing all of these things. And what we don't realize is we're already role playing the idea of family. And so when we now become adults and we experience hardship in pregnancy, getting pregnant, we get pregnant, lose the baby, or experience stillbirth and abortion, that is a loss. That is a traumatic experience, whether by choice or not, that people end up having to experience. And so reproductive trauma, I love the work because it allows people to realize that you're not crazy. This is an idea you've had for a very long time, whether you recognize it or not. And now you're in this place where you're not able to live out this dream. And so I just love the work that I get to do with people. People are beautiful. I say it all the time. People are beautiful.
A lot of times we frame it that, well, it's certain women, but you were from a family, a two-parent home, you were educated. Do you see a range of clients in terms of socioeconomic status, age, and reasons for what brings them to you?
It's interesting because the topic of abortion doesn't always come up directly.
Right.
It's through conversations, it's through creating genograms, it's through asking specific questions about childhood or relationship patterns that some of this information comes up. And so for me, I wouldn't say that I've noticed a specific socioeconomic status or subgroup of women. All of the women that I've encountered who have had abortions are all educated. All of them are educated, including the women who I studied in my dissertation, all educated. I want to say all but one came from a two-parent household.
Could you maybe share some of the findings from your dissertation work?
Absolutely. So what I've found is that the act of abortion is not a discriminatory choice. What I also have found is that there's an overrepresentation of lower socioeconomic women who come from lower socioeconomic statuses, women who have lower education, when in fact, the research was able to help me see a lot of the women who accessed abortion were women who had the means.
Right.
So that also speaks to I would say then underrepresented, which would be the white population of women. I think because many women have had easier access outside of the minority, quote unquote, subgroup, they don't talk about it in the same ways that we talk about it. Birth control is not a conversation. I didn't have any friends who talked about birth control, but as I look back now and I look at my experience in high school, I realized a lot of my counterparts, the white girls, they had conversations about birth control. They were actively on birth control. They were actively talking about condoms.
We always center it around race, and it doesn't seem from your work it's about race. race is just one proxy.
I love that. So I love that because as you were talking, I thought about the women who came from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, the Hispanics, the Blacks, if we want to categorize, right? They had less abortions. The ones who had lower education, their rate of abortion was much less than those who had higher access to resources. Okay. So I appreciate you bringing that up because that is one of the other things that I recognized.
I'm wondering if you can maybe talk about some of the individual level stigmas, either in your research or within your practice, that you find really impacts how women reflect on or experience their pregnancy termination experience.
As it relates to stigma or some of the stigma that surrounds this idea of abortion, one of the things that I've discovered is people often assume that when a woman has an abortion, it's because they were reckless in a sense and promiscuous. And in reality, some women, there are so many different variables that can play a role in someone becoming pregnant, obviously having sex. But in terms of the dynamic of the relationship a person was a part of, we don't know the ins and outs of that relationship. But there's also this idea that the person intentionally went into it knowing that they wanted to have an abortion, when in reality, people start considering their education, their economic status, the status of their relationship. And so if people take the time to actually talk to women who've had abortions, there's the idea of unwanted pregnancy, untimely pregnancy. Those terms matter because a lot of women, they say they actually want a family. They want to be pregnant. But the thing is, right now is not the time. Can some people call that irresponsible? Sure, right? But the reality is, in that moment, so many people feel like there is no other choice. And I can't speak for all women, but majority of the women that I've worked with, they found that there was no other option. They did not want to be ostracized by their family. They didn't want to be outed by their church. And it's not to speak ill of the church, but I do believe that there's some areas that we have, and I say we because I'm part of a church as well, we have overlooked the human side of a woman, the human side of a man that may cause them to quote unquote sin or to do something that doesn't line up with the will of God or line up with who we envision them to be. So thinking about all of that, it only makes sense that the pressures, the internal pressures, the external pressures that a woman and a man, I don't want to neglect the men in this conversation, but there is a true pressure that people fall into. And that's where anxiety can come in. That's where paranoia can come in. That's where symptoms of depression can come in. So I don't want to overlook how abortion, yes, it might have been a choice, but how it can also come in and impact the mental health of a person.
Absolutely. And the abortion is not necessarily what causes the mental health. It's the responses and the support systems and the contextual factors why a woman might have chosen to terminate her pregnancy. If she did choose, there might be coercive factors that come into play. Do you think there are some messages that are unique to Black women that are shaped by the community culture?
I think that still goes back to stigma. I think the idea that if we become pregnant, that we won't be successful. That was one of my driving forces. I'm the oldest in my family. I am first generation born in America. I cannot let my family down. And so the idea that a child will then impede, in some ways it can, right? But it would hinder you from getting an education. It would hinder you from being successful. Those are some of the issues that I have encountered. But I also think people just fear that a child out of wedlock lessens their worth, lessens their value in society. And that is far from the truth. Will there be some challenges that come with it? Possibly. But I think that comes with some people who are married as well. But I think it's the ideas that the world paints is if you have a child and you're in your late teens, early 20s, you haven't figured out life yet, you're doomed.
Sorry, I was going to say, but then on the flip side, if you have an abortion, you also have pushback messages. How do Black women negotiate that?
I don't know if there's a way to actually negotiate it as much as it is just we battle within our own minds all by ourselves. Forget what the world already says about women and how they should carry themselves, especially as Black women in America. But naturally, I think there's a fear that the stigmas that already surround the Black community is that we're irresponsible, that we're not financially wise, that we're just walking around having children. And that's not the truth. And I think subconsciously we live with those ideologies and we make decisions based on those, not knowing that there are those ideas pushing our decision.
What are you seeing with Black women who have terminated pregnancy? Are you seeing any sort of unique issues arise for them?
With the women that I work with, I wouldn't say that there are abnormal issues arising. I can speak about one particular client without disclosing identifying information, but she has both her parents. And for a while, she thought she couldn't reveal the information out of fear of how they would judge her. And what she came to find out was they were extremely supportive. They hated that she thought she needed to go through it by herself. And so what she realized was had she immediately consulted with them, she probably would have chosen differently. But out of fear of judgment, out of fear of them maybe treating her differently, she decided to do this thing, withhold it for a while. So she actually disclosed to me first. And in our work together, she decided she wasn't going to hold it anymore. She would go ahead and share it with her parents. And she was surprised at how kind and patient and willing they were to work with her. Mm-hmm. And so now they've become one of her greatest supports. They've been supportive, but she reverences them and she appreciates them in a greater way because it wasn't you're doomed. It wasn't you're a disgrace and we no longer want to be part of your life.
Mm-hmm. Which goes against a lot of the expectations that people have. I'm glad you brought up the fact that you as a counselor have been able to also guide women in terms of making decisions around how you feel about this and also their mental health. But I know one of the concerns is making sure that women get counseling and support from legitimate professionals. Particularly, we think about crisis pregnancy centers, which are often unlicensed, unregulated, and more concerning, share disinformation about pregnancy termination. In fact, one study found 80% of crisis pregnancy center websites have false or misleading information. So how does someone identify a person who's trained like you versus someone with a political agenda, or more often is just not skilled to handle this kind of stressful mental health issue?
It takes time. I'm in Florida. I service Florida and Texas, and I know that the political side of abortion is a hard one for women who find themselves in that situation and could possibly consider abortion. So the time frame, I think, is the challenge. So when it comes to considering finding a professional who can help, I don't think women are thinking in that way in that moment. They're thinking, what can I get right now to resolve this issue? Because I'm fighting against the clock.
Right.
I can't speak for all states, but in the state of Florida, I think women rush to make a decision and they go to maybe, and I'm speaking in general terms right now because I don't know for sure, but I think women are probably finding themselves rushing to make a decision because they don't know that they'll have enough time if they wait a week, if they wait 2 weeks to get a consultation in. And there's no telling how long that therapist or how soon that therapist can actually get them in to start providing services to them.
Well, I'm in Florida right now, too, so I know how scary it is. And you're on this time clock and even the fears around shutting down and accessing, even if you do have resources to do it. But then on the flip side, from a training perspective, how can a therapist gain the skills and knowledge to do the work in the area like you do? How did you get to gain this level of knowledge and skill to support women in this sort of therapeutic clinical way?
There are plenty of resources out there. I would say that they're not readily available year-round because of the number of providers who are seeking to get the services. So there are perinatal trainings, there's postpartum trainings out there. There's even abortion training, but it's a matter of being willing to find those resources and be willing to pay for the resources because they're not as easily found as, let's say, ethics. or cultural competency. But I think for people who desire to work with this population, I highly, highly, highly recommend that they find specific trainings, not just for the sake of fulfilling CEU requirements on on an annual basis, but really do it because your heart desires to provide services to this population. Because as much as I love it, the truth is, if you come into this realm of work, you're going to have to be willing to deal with grief. You're going to have to be willing to deal with loss, because that's really what's happening. These women are faced with ideas they once had of themselves, never envisioning having a miscarriage, never envisioning having an abortion. And now I'm here. And does that change the value? Does that change the worth that I have for myself? Does that change the trajectory of my life because I made this decision? And so that's a loss. That's a loss of identity. That's a loss of vision you had for your life. And it's going to require someone to be able to be patient with them, to recognize it's not just about losing a child or having had an abortion. It's understanding that there's more to me than just this abortion. And I need to figure out who I am in the process of also understanding that this abortion has impacted me as well.
Now, I know you've been doing this work for close to a decade. So when you think about your trajectory, what kinds of trends are you seeing, particularly as it relates to Black women's experiences? What are you seeing as a concern that we should be looking towards next?
There's a fear that I sense in some of my clients. There's anxiety about whether or not the medical provider is going to actually care for them wholeheartedly as they would their counterparts. And so they go in already on the defense, ready to challenge whatever comes up in the examination room, because they want to make sure that they're not being neglected. I don't find that any of my clients personally have been neglected, haven't received the services they needed and desired, but I do hear them saying, I need to double check. I need to make sure that I get a second opinion to know that this person is actually caring for me as a human and not as a Black woman.
Right. I know we've kind of already talked about issues of shame and stigma and the current political climate, but we also are in a period where there is access to information and resources. If a woman was in a situation where she was considering a pregnancy termination, what would you encourage her to do?
I would encourage her to know that she's not alone. I have been blown away by the number of women who have actually had abortions, the number of women who have experienced miscarriages and thought they were alone. And that is far from the truth. When we think we're alone, what we do is also isolate. And what I would encourage women to do is not allow those small voices to make you believe that there's someone out there who's just going to judge you because you made this decision or because your life took a turn you were not expecting. I would encourage women to seek out services, find out from their insurance providers who are available in their area. If you're looking to receive virtual services, by all means, there's an endless number of platforms that can provide you with different therapists. You can filter through and identify the type of therapist you want. Do you want female? Do you want white female, Black female? Do you want a male? Do you want someone who accepts your insurance? But there are ways that you can identify and access resources. I don't want you to think that you're alone. The studies have shown that at least 1 out of 4 women have had an abortion. Mm-hmm. I can't imagine how much higher the statistics are for women who've had miscarriages and think that something is wrong with them. Maybe this is punishment because I had an abortion. That's one of the things I hear a lot is this is punishment because they had had an abortion prior. But I want you to know that judgment is not the place in the therapy room. And I tell my clients easily, if ever you think that I'm judging you, please find another therapist, because that's not my role. Mm-hmm. That is not what you're coming here for. That is not what your life experience is supposed to bring you to when you decide to start exposing and talking about those things that may have had you bound, may have caused you to make decisions that were not the most conducive for you. We'd be surprised when we don't talk about things. It impacts how we make decisions in relationships. It impacts the way we move about our days, which also means how we engage with community in our work settings. We may not be as productive as we could possibly be because we're holding back this thing that we feel we need to keep away because I dare not let anyone know that I've experienced this thing. So that's my hope for women, to know that there are people out here willing to talk to them without any form of judgment.
That was researcher and clinical therapist Dr. Marckdaline Johnson. To learn more about her research, clinical work, community activities, and social media handles, check out this episode's podcast page on our website. Thanks again for tuning into today's episode of the Psychology of Black Womanhood podcast. We're so grateful to everyone who's been sharing the podcast with their family and friends, really helping us to elevate these vital conversations. You can continue to support us by following us on Instagram, Facebook, Blue Sky, or Threads. And be sure to visit our website to stay up to date on our latest episodes and events. We'll see you next time as we continue to center real-world research in the conversations that matter most.